Welcome back to Foodie Down Bronx. I'm your host, M, the Hungry Dominican. Racist Sandwich is a podcast serving up conversations and perspectives you don't hear anywhere else in food media. The podcast explores race, gender, and class in the food industry. It was nominated for a 2019 James Beard Foundation Broadcast Media Award. Let's check out this snippet from episode 58 of Racist Sandwich, Erasing Black Barbecue.
In Texas, barbecue is king. And if you ask just about any Texan these days, they'll tell you that you haven't truly experienced Texas barbecue until you've had the brisket. This is cow country, after all. We do beef. There's Pecan Lodge up in Dallas, Lockhart Smokehouse, the Salt Lick, Cadillac. The list goes on and on. And then we've got the barbecue joint known all around the world. You know, the one that all y'all non-Texans come to Texas for. Franklin's in Austin.
I'm at Franklin Barbecue in Austin, Texas, to find out what it takes to make my favorite barbecue.
Hi, I'm Aaron Franklin from Franklin Barbecue here in Austin, Texas.
I'm Aaron Franklin, and we're here at Franklin Barbecue in Austin, Texas.
If there is anyone qualified to write a meat smoking manifesto, it is Aaron Franklin.
But the meat in East and South Texas isn't the stuff making it onto Food Network, Bon Appetit, or BuzzFeed. And that media landscape, filled with trendy, raw, rugged, cool white guys cooking brisket, has almost entirely erased barbecue's black roots.
There's a whole lot more to barbecue than cooking brisket. Ribs, tasty chicken are not easy to produce. But my whole thing is if you can't beat them, join them. I figured out how to cook brisket.
Now let's meet Johnny Walker, owner and pitmaster of Mama Jean's in Lampasas, Texas. It's a small town, 7,000-ish people, about an hour northwest of Austin.
There's not a lot of people that look like me in Austin anymore. I can't make a living in Austin. I'm the incredible, invisible man in Austin.
So Walker moved out to the hill country and opened up Mama Jean's, where he puts out the kind of barbecue he grew up eating in South Dallas. Recipes and rubs passed down through generations of great cooks in his family. The basics, he calls them: beef, not to be confused with brisket; chicken; hot links, mainly pork ribs.
Joining us now are producers of Racist Sandwich, Juan Diego Ramirez and Stephanie Kuo. Thank you guys. Thank you guys for being here today. I do want to say I marathoned several episodes of the first season of the podcast with the original hosts, and I am incapable of marathoning anything, regardless of content. Whether it's a Netflix show or a podcast, I just always have to take some bit of a breather. But with this podcast, the content was just so incredible and so informative and so well done and really eye-opening. And I have to say that having this show on now for several episodes, it really helped me kind of understand where I think I want to take this show, because you guys are you really do your research, you really do your homework, and it's just super informative, super fun. Now, before I ask you a bunch of questions about the show, I actually kind of want to connect it to the clip that we just heard, which was the Erasing Barbecue episode. You guys were mentioning in the very beginning of the episode about Beto O'Rourke.
Right.
Right. And it was so interesting to me because, now he's disappeared from the political landscape, really kind of like the conversation about, 2020. And I was just thinking, and this is very much like a hypothetical sort of like, a question that I was thinking about, but I'm curious to know what your thoughts are. Let's say, because I felt like he was clearly trying to make Texas a little more blue than it's always sort of historically been. And I was wondering, if you think that Texas went blue, whether it was with Beto or anyone else, do you think that would have ushered in a new wave of the types of food synonymous with that state? Or do you feel that Texas would have just sort of stayed the way it's always been, known for barbecue and known for, other cuisines that always maintained that sort of conservative mentality of what Texas stands for? Do you think that it would have maybe changed the way that food was consumed in that state?
Well, I'm from Texas originally, born and raised. And so I'll say that, I think something
to keep in mind is that Texas politically and Texas culturally are very different things.
Right. Okay.
I think a lot of mainstream Texas culture is some of the stuff that you might have seen in like old movies, right? Like barbecue, cowboys, all that stuff. But a lot of Texas is also dominated by their largest metropolitan areas: Dallas, Houston, Austin, San Antonio, and I guess Fort Worth and El Paso too. And those are all historically blue cities and metropolitan areas. And so over the past like 10 years, I think Texas has had a real renaissance. And so they're actually quite a player in the food game. They have been for quite some time. I think that barbecue is just kind of the symbol of Texas. But I mean, some of the best chefs are coming out of Houston. For instance, Houston, we did an episode about how Houston is one of the most interesting food cities in the world because the chefs there are really trying new things. I think Dallas was just recently named from Bon Appetit, like the next big restaurant city. I think, is that right? I feel like I think Dallas was. And Austin, of course, has just kind of been a huge player since they've become the hippest city in Texas.
Right.
So I think the political side of Texas and the cultural side have always been very separate and very distinct. I think Beto O'Rourke has been trying, I think Beto and a lot of other Texas Democrats have tried a really hard game to kind of transition us over into a blue state. We're not there, and I don't think that we'll be there for a long time. But in 2018, during the midterms, you saw quite a huge turnout and like more blue voters than there's ever been in the history of the state. So we're on that path.
Can you give me a reason as to why you think the tide is slowly turning, even though it might be going at a snail's pace? Why do you think it's finally happening now?
Oh, I mean,
I think I gotta say it's probably because, in general, it's just how we are the whole country is sort of going blue in a sense. So I think it has nothing to do with just Texas, but I think in general in society, we're just leaning that way slowly.
Yeah, I think also immigration in Texas. There's a lot more immigration to Texas from not only Latin America but Asia, Europe even, and so you're seeing a lot of different political opinions with a lot of immigration and migration to Texas. I think also California, there's been a huge influx of people from California because Texas has kind of branded itself as a huge cultural state. There's also a lot of big companies that have moved out there. Toyota just moved to a Dallas suburb, so you see a lot of Californians there, a lot of tech in Austin. And so a lot of the political opinions that come from like mass migration is starting to happen to Texas. And that's why we're starting to shift. I think it's also a product of the times. A lot of millennials live in Texas now, and a lot of millennials tend to identify as more Democratic. I think, though, that the roots are still really strong in Texas. Like, you've got a bunch of land in between these big metropolitan areas that aren't accounted for when we talk about Texas culturally, and they have a lot of political power, too. But I would say that I was living in Texas. I just recently moved back to New York, but I was living there at a really, clutch political time.
Right.
So I'm really excited to see where it goes from there.
So you've spent time in New York before.
Yeah, so I grew up in Texas, came to New York for grad school, worked out here for a little bit, went back to Texas for about 5 years, and I just moved back last winter. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, so let's go back to the origins of the show, starting off with the name Racist Sandwich. That's a grabber. Like, it just, it kind of like, you're sifting through all these podcasts, and that really stops you.
It's a lot of like, what?
Yeah,
Racist
it's like,
sandwich?
yeah,
We
can you
get that so
explain
much.
this to me?
It's funny because we've gotten emails where people don't want anything to do with us because of the name.
Really?
Yeah. So I mean, and we have to explain to people what we do. So the name was actually given by the last host of the podcast, and it was from a story that happened in Portland, Oregon. There was a principal at a school in Portland, Oregon, who wanted to serve something else rather than just the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches at school, because she was talking about the multi-ethnicity of like the students at her school, and yeah, so then she said like, well, we can serve like empanadas or any other anything else aside from just like a peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Right. And so then like that went somebody caught that on the news.
Local news caught it.
Yeah, and then people started calling the woman, or they started saying that if she's making the peanut butter and jelly sandwich a racist sandwich. Right. So then that's where sort of the name came out of.
There's like a screen cap too that circulated for a while of like a plain peanut butter jelly sandwich, and like the title card underneath it is "racist sandwich?" ? And I think that's
kind of how it stuck.
Do you guys even like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches?
Oh, like when I'm sometimes.
I didn't start eating them until I was in my 20s, and I was like, I'm really happy I didn't have them growing up because I'm not a fan of them at all.
I ate them because in public school, you know, they serve them.
Yeah.
So I was introduced to it in public school. So yeah.
So you
But I'm
guys
home now.
are the producers of the show. Have you been with the show since the beginning, or when did you guys jump on board?
No, neither of us. I jumped on board the second year. So the
And,
first
yeah.
year, the second year, and then you.
And I joined in February 20.
So third year.
Yeah, the third year. But what was 2018, 2018?
Yeah, I can't think.
Yeah,
It's been a long time.
Yeah.
We've done a lot of work.
yeah.
Right.
I'm the newest member of the team. So we were not founders. We kind of inherited the show. Yeah.
So what drew you to take over the show, to help make more episodes of the show?
Oh,
That's
well.
a good question.
Yeah, I mean, Zahir, Jan Mohammed, and Soleiho, who were the original co-hosts and the original founders, they were moving on to new parts of their careers. Soleil is now the food critic for the San Francisco Chronicle and really couldn't be affiliated with a show that did this content when she was producing another for another outlet. And then Zahir was really wanting to focus on his writing. And so we had a big meeting and we decided, like, listen, they trusted us with the future of the show. We'd been with it for a while. And they said, whatever you want to do with it, we'll support. If you want to keep going, if you want to find new hosts, if you want to just let it kind of rest where it is, kind of have it end on a high, that's great too. And then we've written about this before and we said, you know, we were considering just kind of walking away from it because we're both really busy now.
Yeah.
But then, you know, this year, a lot of things happened. We were featured on a lot of best of lists, like must listen to podcasts of the year, like the 100 must listen podcasts of the year by New York Magazine. We were nominated for a James Beard Media Award, and we were getting tons of emails and tons of tweets from people asking when we would come back, and it just kind of felt.
Yeah, it just felt natural.
It
just
felt
to come
natural.
back.
You had that built-in audience who was asking for you guys to make more content.
Yeah.
And I think there was a lot of like untold stories that we sort of always wanted to, like, you know, tackle.
Sure.
And that was one of the things that I guess propelled us to come back. You know, we had you know, I guess some sort of ideas and you know, just certain conversations that we just wanted to keep on going and keep them going, and we just decided to just do it. Yeah.
So let's get into a little bit of what you guys always get into, which is food and race. So growing up for me, I spent a lot of time in the Upper West Side of Manhattan. I used to go to high school there, but I lived in the northern part of Manhattan. So that train ride was, you know, the scenery changes, the types of restaurants you see change, the types of food that you have access to always changes. And that's clearly a subject you guys, you know, have, you know, sort of learned about as you do your podcast, but you're also very diligent in speaking about. Why do you think some neighborhoods have better access or access to better foods in other neighborhoods? What's the one thing that you might sort of connect the dots with through the podcast and your guest? The sort of one thing that connects that reasoning as to why, you know, let's say Northern Manhattan doesn't have or at least when I was there, doesn't have a smoothie shop versus
Right.
the Upper West Side, which
Right.
is fruit stands everywhere and smoothie shops and you know, health options.
Yeah.
So
I used to be a poverty reporter back in the day, which was last year. And really, it's purchasing power and political voice. That's really a huge part of it. You can't lobby for better smoothie shops or salads or better greens if your community doesn't perceive you to have quite the political power that others do. We know that, like, upper class white neighborhoods tend to be very vocal in politics, and those outside of those demographics are usually working multiple jobs and don't have time to go to city council meetings and don't have time to do this, don't have time to vote, they don't have the resources to do all these things, and so that's what happens.
yeah, and a lot of these neighborhoods are like immigrant neighborhoods. Again, like, you know, they don't have the voice to speak out. And there's one of the things that we talk about too is food deserts. Food deserts happen in a lot of big cities. For example, the podcast started in Portland, Oregon. Outside of Portland, Oregon is a vast farming area. There's a town in one of these farming areas that is mostly farm workers live there, but it's also considered a food desert, although there's farms around the area. So the people that live there don't have access to food, even though they're farming the food.
Right.
And that happens all over the U.S. too. Outside of big metropolitan cities, you'll have like farming areas where people often don't have access to the food they're farming.
Well, I mean, in a lot of respects, that's what people would label the Bronx, a food desert, because, and I said this when I was, I did a podcast over the weekend, and I was speaking to the host, and I had said, you know, walking around the Bronx, it feels, in a lot of the neighborhoods, it feels like you're walking through a mall, because all you have are fast food options. You don't have really anything that could be remotely considered healthy. And yeah, you know, you make a valid, of course, super correct point. It's just that these neighborhoods aren't political, right? So they don't speak up. They don't put their thoughts into votes. They don't. And I guess for me, growing up in that part of Manhattan, I didn't really think of it that way. I didn't think that I never married food and politics together. I just sort of accepted what it was, right? Whatever is around me is what's around me. And then going downtown and seeing that discrepancy of food, I never really questioned it. And I guess it's also because, in a way, I wasn't political myself, so I didn't. I just sort of accepted what it was, and I didn't really think about it. Do you think most people understand the connection between food and politics, or they, like me growing up, just sort of accept what is around them?
No, I think people just, I think they go back to that, and we get emails where they tell us why.
Yeah, why are you making this?
Why are you making this
like why are you making this political? Why is it about race? Why is it about culture? Like, why can't food just be about food? And I should also just really quickly say that, like, a lot of these neighborhoods where food deserts occur, it's not that they aren't political or they don't want to be. I think it's a matter of they're just not enabled to. Like, there just isn't the right channels for them. Some of them it's language proficiency issues,
I agree. Yes,
all that
for
stuff.
sure.
And so, but yeah, I think like I run in a certain circle where all of my friends understand that food is really political, but we get enough hate mail and enough hate tweets to know that there are people who don't know or who refuse to see it or who reject it completely. And so I think, I mean, I don't know how to put that into numbers. I'm not sure like what majority is, but we do hear from a lot of people who don't get it.
One of our favorite comments is like, this podcast makes me feel uncomfortable listening to.
Yeah, yeah. We get that sometimes.
Why do you think that is? I would assume that, you know, again, since I just listened to episode after episode, and there were moments where I was, you know, I was really affected by what I heard, but in no way was I like, don't bring this up or don't talk about this or that subject. Why do you think people have such a visceral reaction to what you guys are doing?
Because everyone eats and everyone thinks that everyone like if everyone does the same thing every day together, we assume that all of our experiences are the same. Like, how can food be so different for someone else? We're just eating it, you know, it's sustenance. I think potentially too that people who feel this way just have never had to think about food outside of it being on their plate every day. I don't know, it's just it's a mixture of privilege and ignorance. There's a lot of that. But I don't know, I think it's just because it's so universal that there's no way that it could be that different.
Right. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, I was like, can you somehow gauge who are the ones that are sending you these emails, and can you kind of like take from them, like maybe you just, you know, since food is just something that maybe in a way you take for granted, you don't really want to have it be over politicized or
yeah, like
you know, you don't want to think about it too much.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
you're killing,
You
like
know?
you're killing my vibe. Like
You're-
don't
right.
don't ruin food for me. Yeah,
Right,
it's a lot of that.
Exactly. The podcast does an amazing job of highlighting chefs of color, which of course is for me it's the biggest sell, because with this show, I wanted to make sure I had a platform for mainly chefs of color. I mean, I'm open to anybody who comes on, of course, but I felt like this is exactly where I want to take this show, this direction. And so when I realized you guys were doing the same, and you had been doing the same, it was like, this is amazing. Why was it important for you guys to do that? Or was it a thing where, because of the subject matter, it only led you to chefs of color?
Well, I think the that came about because there's not a lot of voice. There's not a lot of outlets actually for not just chefs, writers, food writers, journalists of color. And so I think just creating an outlet for these folks, for everybody, for us, I guess, because I'm included in that conversation as well, was very important. It's very important because you have certain magazines, food magazines that cater to certain people, and we didn't see a reflection of us in these outlets. So when the original host created the podcast, I guess that was one of the intentions, and that attracted me to the podcast as a newcomer to the team.
Yeah.
So I thought it was very important.
Yeah, I mean, if you're on Food Network, which has gotten substantially better, but if you look at the bylines on Bon Appetit, even Eater, you check out Food Network, I mean, they're all predominantly white and male. And we know as people of color, they screw up a lot of the stories, they screw up a lot of stuff. And so it just felt time that we tried to provide balance, we tried to correct some of that in our podcast, but also we know that there are people of color doing the work out there. They're just not being amplified in any way. They're doing a lot of the cooking. They're doing a lot of the original imagination and ideation, yet they're not the ones on camera. They're not the ones behind the mic. They're not the ones being photographed. And we're in a unique position as people of color who work in food media to highlight those people. And it was a very intentional decision to do so.
Right. That's what I found super interesting about the, going back to the Erasing Barbecue episode. It said in the episode that about 20, 25 years ago, you'd walk into a barbecue restaurant and you would have a black chef and you would see them in the kitchen. Fast forward to now, it's a white chef and he or she is getting the attention, the media attention. And so there is this skewed view of barbecue and this super diluted version of let's say barbecue for just of course for this example, and the history of the food. And it's also something that I don't even think I thought twice about, honestly, when I was younger. I just accepted again, like when I was living in Northern Manhattan, that this is the food that I have around me, and this is where the food comes from, the people that I see on television. Let's take a quick break and we'll continue our conversation. Guys, grab yourselves a snack. Foodie Down Bronx will be right back.